I want to ask you a question. How stressed are you? Seriously, on a daily basis, if you had to rate your level of stress on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say that you fall on most days? And I'm asking this because the past 4.5 years have presented the world with plenty of reasons to be stressed out, to be worried, and to be anxious about all kinds of things. We all know what 2020 brought us, globally speaking, and the years that followed have affected essentially every person on the planet in one way or another. Supply chains disrupted, long-standing businesses closed, jobs were lost in unprecedented numbers, and the world as we once knew it changed almost overnight in so many ways. Our country's more politically divided than ever before. Food, gas, the cost of living continue to climb, and average Americans are struggling to get by. For me personally, the past 4.5 years brought changes in my life in more ways than I could have ever imagined. A change in ownership where I work brought new leadership to the helm. Some health issues arose that I couldn't ignore. Financial challenges came to light that were unexpected. A recent hip replacement and having to take time off of work to recover. All of these things have been challenging and they've all been stressful. And the other thing I realized is that all of these stresses in my life, they seem to be additive. They feel as if they're stacked on top of each other. And the truth is that they have been. If you followed my channel for a while, you may know that a little over a year ago, a new doctor that I saw for the first time labeled me as pre-diabetic when my fasting blood glucose came back at 113. But something I haven't mentioned before is that during that doctor's appointment, my blood pressure was much higher than I ever thought it would be. And for the first time in my adult life, I started to worry about my overall health. I grew up as an athlete in high school, and I've made fitness a priority most of my life. So the things that came to light during that visit, they caught me off guard and they took me by surprise, honestly. But because of those revelations, I began to get even more serious about monitoring different parameters of my health. And over the months that followed, I began to utilize a continuous glucose monitor to get a better handle on how various foods were affecting my blood glucose. What I've learned from using a continuous glucose monitor has been eye-opening. But more than even the impact of various foods on my blood glucose, I've been most surprised by the extent that stress has impacted what I'm seeing in my blood glucose readings, both at home and at work. The very first A1C test I've ever had in my life was just over 6 weeks ago. I had labs drawn in preparation for a total hip replacement, and that A1C came back at 5.2, which is completely normal. A 5.2 A1C isn't diabetic or even pre-diabetic. So as I've worn the continuous glucose monitor over the past several months, both before, during, and after my hip replacement, it's given me more clarity about what's really going on with my blood glucose over the course of any given day. And one of the things that has really surprised me, especially because my recent A1C was normal, is that I assumed my blood glucose levels were likely always staying in the normal or healthy range more often than not as well. That hasn't been the case. Depending on what I happen to eat for dinner in the evening, my blood sugar can fluctuate quite a bit during the night while I sleep. Not surprisingly, the more carbohydrate I eat, the more I'll see my blood glucose hover between 100 and 120. The more consistently low carb I happen to eat, my monitor in the morning often shows my blood glucose to be steadily in the 80s or 90s over the entire night while I sleep. Now, none of this is entirely surprising to me. I'm a doctor and I have a reasonable understanding of basic human physiology, but that being said, like so many people on the planet, until getting a continuous glucose monitor, I've never had any way of knowing what my blood glucose levels might be on a near minute-to-minute basis, and I doubt your doctor is any more aware of their blood glucose levels either. So I want to give you some insight into what I've seen with my continuous glucose monitor and talk about some of the correlations I've noticed where these glucose readings are concerned and what was going on when I recorded these numbers. Going back several weeks, in case you didn't watch this video here, the medications I was taking after my hip replacement, in all honesty, resulted in severe painful constipation. And 6 days after my surgery, I found myself in dire straits in the bathroom and thinking back upon the news of how Elvis Presley met his final demise. 6 days after my total hip replacement at 6:22 a.m. in the morning, even if you've never experienced something like this yourself, you can look at my blood glucose reading and in that moment, at least get a sense of what my body was going through at the time. I mean, seriously, my fasting blood glucose spiked to 208. This paints a very clear picture of what the body does in the event of physical pain, stress, or both. You can also see that my blood glucose glucose leveled out and came back down hours later after that pain and discomfort had resolved. The immediate days after my hip surgery, even though I ate very little food over that period of time, showed jumps in my blood glucose as a reflection of the post-operative pain and healing process surrounding my new hip. But as the weeks have passed and my hip has healed further and my pain has largely diminished, my blood glucose levels have also normalized. And even though that's the case and my blood glucose is normal most of the time at home, it still doesn't tell the whole story, because even if my blood glucose has been in the normal range all night long, it begins to steadily rise as I head to work for a shift in the ER. In fact, it's not uncommon for me to see my blood sugar in the 140s or the 150s, and for it to remain in that range depending on what I might be dealing with in the ER on any given day. This is a reflection of what stress does in regard to blood glucose. You don't have to be chased by a tiger for your liver to begin dumping glucose into the bloodstream in larger amounts to help you rise to the occasion and face a stressful situation or a potentially dangerous threat. Just recently, I had a one-on-one meeting with someone. It wasn't clear to me beforehand whether it would be adversarial or not, but entering into that meeting, I anticipated the possibility that it could be. And though the conversation was cordial for the most part, there was a topic of contention that arose that was stressful on some level. I could feel my blood pressure and my pulse begin to rise as I realized that we were at odds over a particular issue. I snapped a screenshot of my glucose monitor reflecting that specific time frame, and sure enough, it showed the physiologic picture of what was happening in that moment, reflected by a rise in my blood glucose to 168. I wasn't being chased by a tiger. I wasn't in a life or death situation, but still my blood glucose shot up in that moment to 168. In that short period of time, I knew my blood pressure and my pulse rate were up as well. So what's the takeaway here? And what have I learned by monitoring my blood glucose in these various situations over the past few months? Well, at least for me, because of the work that I do in the ER, I know that I'm going to be faced weekly with at least the potential for stressful situations to occur. People don't plan to get ill or injured. They don't plan to break bones or get into car wrecks or cut their leg with a chainsaw trimming trees in their backyard. But all of these things do happen to people. And because these things are realities in the lives of somebody on the planet and in multiple communities around the globe at any moment in time, I wait in anticipation for people to come to the ER seeking help for their particular emergency. This is a recurrent situation for me week after week, and it has been for many years. My work in the ER holds a level of chronic stress for me, even though it's a career I've chosen and a stress level I'm emotionally adapted to. But we also know that chronic stress isn't good for us. It's associated with the development of anxiety, depression, insomnia, headaches, digestive problems, weight gain, the development of heart disease, high blood pressure, and the potential for stroke, as well as problems with memory and focus. I'm well aware of the stress associated with what I do for a living, but do I have the most stressful job in the world? Not by a long shot. In fact, stress is in the eye of the beholder. What's stressful for one person may be a walk in the park for another. I do what I do because it's the world I grew up in. It's what I know. I can't imagine the responsibility of flying hundreds of people across the ocean as a commercial pilot. I can't imagine chasing bad guys with guns as a police officer. And believe it or not, it's difficult for me to imagine waiting tables in a busy restaurant and dealing with angry or abusive customers day after day. There are lots of people who work in stressful situations or have difficult coworkers, management, or bosses. You don't have to be a brain surgeon to be under a lot of stress. What's going on with all these people where their blood glucose and their A1C are concerned? And what's going on with you? The fact is, most people have no idea, and unfortunately, because doctors have traditionally only been able to evaluate blood work from their patients in snapshot moments of time, the broader picture of how stress may be affecting their patients hasn't been something readily available to them. But at least where blood glucose is concerned, that's changing with the introduction of continuous glucose monitors, and I predict more and more doctors will begin to recommend or prescribe them to their patients in the years to come. For me personally, I've started to pay closer attention to the things that bring stress into my life, and I'm doing my best not to ignore those things. Can I retire and eliminate whatever stress my job adds to my life? Possibly, but for now, that's something that remains an unknown, at least for the immediate future. What I do know is that I'll continue to do the things I know that are helpful in managing my day-to-day stress. Number one is to keep exercise at the top of my list of priorities and to expend energy every single day through some form of aerobic activity, because exercise is one of the best ways to manage stress that we know. Number two, I know I need to continue to eat the best nutrition possible, and for me, that means eating low carb, ketogenic, or carnivore, and being very conscious to avoid eating empty or unnecessary calories. Number three, I'm going to prioritize getting outside for some sunshine as much as possible and taking breaks from long stretches working at the computer for projects such as planning and scripting these YouTube videos. Number four, I'm going to take some time every day to listen to music or to audiobooks that I enjoy and that keep me in a state of peace, as well as taking time to do something that I truly love, which is studying jazz and playing the electric bass. Number five, I'm going to use my continuous glucose monitor not only to continue dialing in my diet, but also to keep myself aware of how my blood glucose may be responding in situations that are either overtly stressful, as well as in situations that may be producing subconscious stress and inadvertently raising my blood glucose levels in those moments. At the end of the day, nobody benefits from living in a state of chronic stress. So taking some time to figure out and acknowledge who, what, or where the sources of stress happen to be in your life is important. Look back over the 5 things that I'm going to implement to help reduce stress in my own life and make a list of things that you can do to reduce stress in your life as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.